Hi, my name is Rebecca Young, and I got involved with Equal Justice Needham for Families in the summer of 2020 after George Floyd's murder. It was an important time that I felt I needed to connect with our community. We were in the midst of a pandemic, and I was feeling inspired and motivated and activated to get involved in our town in increasingly more meaningful ways for me, and became involved with Equal Justice Needham for Families in order to connect directly with kids and families during the pandemic. The work that we do at Equal Justice Needham and Equal Justice Needham for Families has been so important to make connections with kids and families about how to think about and engage in diversity, equity, and inclusion work with our youngest members of our society and our community here in Needham. One of the things I also have been, really inspired to do is to become more involved in our town as a town meeting member. And I want to be able to bring my values and have them come to life here in the work that I do with Needham Town Meeting. So I am thrilled to be a part of Equal Justice Needham and Equal Justice Needham for Families. And I will continue to find lots of ways to integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion, not only into my work world, but also to my community where I live, right here in Needham.
Hello and welcome to Moving Forward Together with Equal Justice in Needham. I'm the show host, Massiel Gallardo. Town elections for town meeting, select board, and other board positions, including the planning board, are coming up on April 12th. During elections, residents have the opportunity to make their priorities known, so local elections are very important. All 240 town meeting members are up for election this year, with the length of their terms dependent on the number of votes they receive. There are decisions that town meeting will make that will influence how the town develops. And Equal Justice Needham folks have some thoughts about what might increase equity and make the town more inclusive and welcoming. Today, we will speak with 4 EJN participants who will tell us what they will be looking for from our next elected town government. Paula Dickerman will talk about how restorative justice and restorative practices can be used in our town to further our goals for equity and inclusiveness. Jim Flanagan will explain EJN's goals for increasing housing choice in town to keep Needham affordable for low and middle income families and seniors. Rachel Green will talk about the history of housing discrimination in Needham and how the town might remedy past injustices. And Smriti Rao will join us from India, where she's visiting family, to talk about the need for better transparency and oversight of the Needham Police. Let's start with Smriti. Smriti, would you please explain what EJN is asking the town to do to assure equity and public safety?
So, we at EJN have been thinking about for the last 2 years ways in which public safety in Needham can be reimagined to ensure that it is equitable and that it allows everybody in Needham, our employees, our visitors, and our residents to feel safe and to feel welcomed. A lot of this work has been based around the Needham Police Department's own data and some of the racial disparities in that data. And then more recently, we've been trying to read about what other towns in Massachusetts have been doing around similar issues of reimagining public safety. So one of the things, we're glad to support that the Select Board is already working on is to move our public safety departments off what's called the civil service list, which is, of course, a way in which at a state level, potential candidates for the Needham Police Department are pre-identified on the basis of a state level exam and certain other criteria that the state kind of determines. And of course, this on the one hand was designed to prevent nepotism in hiring, to make sure that there's a standardization in terms of the skill and qualities of the incoming candidates. But I think what it has ended up doing for a lot of towns, including Needham, is making it hard for those towns to try to diversify their police forces because they have to follow the pre-approved list of potential candidates on the civil service list. So Needham Select Board and Town Manager are working on negotiations with our police unions to try to move us off the civil service list. This is something we support. And you might notice if you're a town meeting member or if you're a resident that in the draft warrant for the May town meeting, there's a placeholder for a new contract with the Needham Police Department. And there's also a placeholder for a home rule petition if in fact these negotiations allow us to move off the civil service list. The one thing, we would love from a transparency and information perspective is a little more understanding of what kind of system of hiring Needham will replace the civil service list with. So as a community who's very interested in seeing this diversification happen, but also trying to make sure that, we have some innovative and interesting criteria for incoming candidates. And of course, we continue to avoid nepotism and so on and so forth. It would be really interesting to involve the community in discussions around what would replace the civil service list. And so, that might be something to kind of think about. And when and if this comes to be, it might be a question to ask is what is the new system going to look like? And is there some ability for the community to provide input on whatever this new process is going to be? So that's one thing that I think is coming up very soon. We have some other initiatives that we strongly support and that many others in town have also spoken about. And one of them is, along with this effort to move our department off the civil service list, as part of the larger project of actually reimagining all of public safety, we think it would be really useful for the select board to bring in an expert who can review our policies and practices and benchmark them against best practices, benchmark them against some of these innovative things that other towns are doing both in Massachusetts and outside Massachusetts. And so bringing in an expert review and funding that and supporting that is, we think, something that would be very helpful so that we have some understanding of what interesting things we might be able to do to make public safety in Needham more equitable. And then there are two other things that, again, I think have come up in many conversations. And one of them is, because reimagining public safety in this way is a weighty and difficult task, it might be very useful to think about a public safety committee comprised of residents and folks from the Needham Police Department, the fire department, maybe the public health department, working together to sort of coordinate and brainstorm and respond to the needs of these different departments and of public safety, and also to kind of be a conduit for citizen requests for data or information or other kinds of feedback that the community might have for the police department and vice versa. So we think a citizens public safety committee would be another really important step in this larger process of reimagining public safety. And then the last point we'd like to make is borrowed from Amherst and Northampton and Lynn and some other towns in Massachusetts. These towns have already moved forward with creating an alternative first responder service that is unarmed and comprised of behavioral and mental health experts. As we know, mental and behavioral health crises are an increasing part of what our police officers are asked to respond to. And while they do receive training, and I'm sure they are working really hard and really compassionately with the families of those who do go into crises, other towns and at the state level, this new legislation are exploring systemic answers to this question of how can we best serve those who go into mental and behavioral health crises? And is there a way that we could create these first responder services whose primary focus are exactly those kinds of situations. And that is what is leading Amherst, Northampton, Lynn to have set up these alternative first responder services. These are groups of people whose resources and training are devoted to handling such situations. And so this might be something that our town should explore and, might help in terms of allowing us to respond with the necessary resources and expertise to those who undergo these crises. There's potential support for this in the state legislature at this point, including from our state Senator Rebecca Rausch, who supports a bill that would fund such alternate first responder services. We think that is also something that we should be exploring in Needham if, our neighbors in Amherst and Northampton and Lynn and so on are already moving forward. We can learn a lot from them, and that's something we should be able to do in our town as well.
Thank you, Smriti. Now we go on with Rachel Green. Hi, Rachel. Why does Needham have the moral responsibility to increase its diversity in work to be more welcoming for people of color who might want to move to town?
Thank you, Massiel. That's a great question. There are definitely a number of reasons that Needham has this responsibility. A big part of it is rooted in Needham's past and really analyzing why there are not many people of color here in the first place, what has been done to exclude people, and how to remedy that harm. It's definitely a subject I'd like to see town officials taking seriously and looking more into. So EJN as a group has not specifically looked at, or more importantly, collaborated with others on tangible ways to enact specific remedies. Our housing goals of increasing housing stock to increase diversity are definitely parallel to this topic. But what I'm bringing up here goes further than just increasing housing stock. Remedies is drawing a line from the past and evaluating a proper compensation for past harms. So that's a huge topic, and there's no way to do it justice in just a couple minutes. So I'm not even going to try or pretend that I'm even slightly qualified, which I'm not. But the thing I can do is present examples of how Needham has perpetuated harm in certain ways and provide material for people to start to or continue to think about how Needham was designed to be the way that it is today. So in terms of thinking about the suburbs, it's a common concept that the suburbs were created for white people in a segregated way, starting with Levittown, Pennsylvania, considered the first real suburb with racially restrictive covenants written into the deeds of every home. And Needham really isn't much different from that. So Jean McKnight and I looked into the history of housing discrimination that we presented on a past Moving Forward Together TV show, and found one specific example of a racially restrictive covenant in a deed on a home near Olin College in Needham. So that's literally a legal document keeping people of color out and deciding who gets to live here and accumulate wealth over time. And this builds the foundation for the Needham we see today. We can't separate ourselves from that. Also, this 1938 document showing that Needham Heights was deemed risky for home loans due to, quote, foreign concentration, which is redlining. And then also you can see on that document that there were no Black people living in Needham. So these facts really ring true today. They really set the foundation for the Needham that we see today. Also, two other resources to highlight this issue are available through the Needham Public Library. So town historian Gloria Grice and Reverend Katie Scudera did research into the history of enslaved people in Needham. And also Dr. Kelly Carter Jackson did a presentation on slavery in New England that I encourage people to look into both of those resources. So basically, based on all this information and the fact that we benefit from these past harms, we can see that something needs to be done about this. And I will continue to try, and I hope everyone watching, and especially town officials, really continue to look at Needham with more of a critical eye, with these facts in mind, and accept that these past actions affect our lives and the resources and prosperity we're able to experience today. and who is excluded from that, because it is purposeful. And once that really sinks in, we can mobilize and enact changes. And I really want my elected town officials to have this on the agenda and be doing what they can to find quantifiable ways to step beyond just looking at the past, but figure out ways to remedy it.
Thank you, Rachel. That was great information. We appreciate having you here. Our next guest, Paula Dickerman. Paula, welcome. Would you please explain restorative justice and why it is an equity issue that EJN supports?
Thanks. The use of restorative justice or restorative practices, which I'll refer to some as RJP, has become much more popular over the years throughout the country. Very simply, a restorative process is one that focuses on restoring harm through the participation of all parties involved. It's a process of honest conversation that asks what harm was caused, who was harmed, who's responsible for that harm, and how can we all agree that that harm should be repaired. The focus in the criminal justice system is often on punishing the offenders, whereas the focus in restorative practices looks at the victim needs and the offender responsibility for repairing harm. So focus is on accountability. The underlying practices for RJP are that harm is a violation between people and relationships rather than rules and laws. And it can include physical harm, loss of property, but also emotional harms like fear, discomfort, and hurt. And those violations create obligations. So what justice looks like is something that it involves all people who are affected. It's a very particular circle process of conversation involving the responsible people, that is to say the people who caused the harm, those who were harmed, who we often think of as victims or impacted parties. And it also often includes authority figures and other people from the community who have been affected, all agreeing on how the harm can be repaired. It gives the victims or impacted parties an opportunity to be heard, which the criminal justice system often does not. And it really requires the responsible parties to be held accountable for that harm. You asked why this is an equity issue. First of all, in restorative practice circles, no participant is more important than another. There's a skilled, disinterested person who runs the process, and everyone has an equal opportunity to state their perspective without being interrupted, without being grilled, in a safe environment. Also, in cases where there are issues of bias or unequal treatment, the process will likely uncover those. And this is different than the punitive approach that's taken in criminal justice and often in disciplinary situations as well. And the reason we're talking about this and talking about town meeting and our government is that there are two specific areas where this can be used in our town: the public schools and the police department. In the case of our schools, we were really pleased to learn that there already is some use of RJP in different levels throughout the district. The purpose there being to build more inclusive and supportive school environment for all of the students. Some district leaders, some counselors, and some faculty have received training in restorative practices, and that equips them, of course, with the skills that are needed to implement this particular process when there are behavioral or other conflicts. What we would like to see is even more movement toward use of these practices throughout our district and in many situations in the district. And of course, that requires more teacher training in these specific skills. There is an organization, Pathways to Restorative Practices, offers this training specifically for use in the schools. Now, this training, of course, takes money. So we're going to be looking at the school committee budget. And we would really like to see more resources allocated directly for this important work. In terms of our police department, there's some great work going on there too. They have a diversion program for working with youth who have committed harms in the schools and in the community. They share a desire and they've allocated resources to work with parties involved in criminal activity in ways that provide resources where needed to decrease the chances of recidivism. We've begun conversations with Chief Schlittler about the possibility of our Needham Police Department offering restorative justice specifically as one more tool that they can choose to use in cases where that might be the best approach. There's another organization called Communities for Restorative Justice, or C4RJ, that partners with 31 police departments in Massachusetts and 3 district attorneys' offices to provide this service. The police department or the district attorney's office refer cases to C4RJ when they think that it's a situation that would be better served by restorative justice rather than see it go through the criminal justice system. It's been used successfully in Middlesex, Suffolk, and Northwestern District Attorney's offices, and in municipalities like Newton, Lexington, Belmont, Arlington, Wellesley. And the cases range from shoplifting, maybe underage driving, to hate crimes, larcenies, and assaults. And of course, it would take money, so we want to keep our eyes on that. While I'm here, there's another thought that we wanted to share. We know that the town is working on ways for residents to communicate with town meeting members by email, and that is a great improvement. It'll allow residents to become more involved in town issues and town decisions, which is so important. And lastly, but importantly, and related to our goal of equity, is to keep a close eye on how successful the town is in reaching out widely to make sure that a variety of constituent perspectives are included both in our government and in our decisions.
Thank you, Paula. That was extensive information and history about restorative justice. Thank you for that. And next we have Jim Flanagan. The EJN Housing Working Group has been hard at work articulating the challenges Needham faces in keeping the town affordable. What are some specific actions you will be looking for from town government?
The Housing Working Group informally got together because we realized barriers to fair and affordable housing have been a major contributing factor to barriers to equal justice and racism over the years. Much less so today, but the historic residue is still relevant and impactful when you look at the differences, for example, in net worth amongst families of color versus white families. The nice thing is that our Equal Justice Needham Housing Working Group has been able to learn from and build on the activity of others. And there's part of this need is a greater sense of awareness, but also urgency. The economic forces that have increased to the benefit of many of us fortunate enough to live here, increased the value of home, has also further decreased the ability to diversify our community, both racially and economically. Things we've been talking about and exploring humbly because we're not necessarily experts, but we've learned a lot along the way. The overarching thing is zoning. The way Needham was zoned was not based on, if you really look back, like so many things at the root causes, it wasn't based on some really well thought out, open, diverse, open-minded master plan, right? A lot of it was based on happenstance, timing, and probably some racism. Not probably, definitely, and that's the redlining aspect. So what we're left with now is, people have worked hard to refine some of that, but when you look at the percentage of Needham that's single family zoned, there's just not logic to it. It was something that happened at a point in time. And so we have to rethink every bit of that. That includes, I think the driver there at the end of the day, we want to see more diverse and integrated housing throughout our community. So we've got to look at every area. Specific to zoning, there are a few things. I think one of the easiest things to do is to reform the accessible dwelling unit zoning regulations. Towns like, I believe, Lexington, Concord, towns similar to Needham have done this years ago. So I think we're really behind in that area. And that what that basically says is someone within reasonable zoning requirements can take a part of their house, and in addition to their house, a garage, and convert it for renting to now relatives are allowed, but expanding that. And that will instantly increase the supply of affordable housing. Another element we're exploring is as homes are torn down and larger homes are built, reflecting on what's the economic impact of that and what's the impact in affordability. All right. It doesn't mean, and this is my personal take on it, it doesn't mean you have to stop those tear downs, because I honestly don't think that that's a winning hand to play. But what you can do is look at transfer fees and environmental impact fees that then get rolled into a centralized fund and help to offset the impact of that development by purchasing homes that are more entry-level homes and so on and so forth. Recognizing that our current state right now of the huge increase in home values is almost creating a pyramid type situation. It's certainly not a scheme, but it could end up that we don't have enough balanced layers where folks can enter the community and upscale or downscale, and they can't move as things just get torn down and just that higher end gets built towards. What ends up happening there is it's like a house of cards. It falls in on itself. And suddenly you've got too many super high-end homes from a pure economic standpoint. From a societal standpoint, you just lack economic diversity and richness that is necessary for a good, vibrant community that the Needham has been more of, at least from an economic diversity standpoint in the past. And there's things we can do there. Everything from supporting the Needham Housing Authority. I'm impressed with Reg Foster and the Needham Housing Authority have done with a bold modernization plan. And so we're very much behind that. And that creates some really great opportunities for folks, again, to enter, afford, to stay in our community, to keep it more diverse and rich. We're looking at some properties towards the center of town, especially with the MBTA requirement, MBTA related requirement for greater affordable housing in our community. So we're looking at other opportunities where there might be adjacent parcels. Again, we're not putting any money for it. We're just an informal group. But how can we help connect the dots and get the community behind stuff that moves the needle? But I think overwhelmingly Needham's not a selfish place, and they can really get behind what we're doing based on a sense of fairness and justice.
Very true, very accurate. Thank you, Jim, for sharing with us about equity and diversity in housing in Needham. Thank you for being here. And thank you to all the panelists for speaking with us today. I hope over time, the goals you have articulated are supported by the various elected bodies in town to bring even more equity to Needham. Viewers, please take a moment to fill out a poll on the EJN TV show webpage about what we covered today. If you have any comments or suggestions, you can get in touch at thishappenshereinneedham@gmail.com. Your voice matters. Don't forget to vote on April 12th. Until next time.